Welcome back to another episode of GSC. The shop truck here, my 01 GMC 2500 HD Duramax, lost the hydroboost yesterday while we were coming back with an engine for Dad. So I'm going to work on changing this. So I'm going to flip the camera around and show you what's going on, explain the tools we need as we go, and hopefully this helps somebody else out in the future. So I'll flip this around and show you what we got. All right, here's our hydroboost right there. We've got a pressure line, feed line, return, and event. This line here is a 16 millimeter. This line here is an 18 millimeter wrench. They popped right off on this. As you can see, this hydro might have been replaced at one point. The truck's got 313,000 miles, so it wouldn't surprise me. This vent line here slips right off. It has a ornery little pinch clamp on it. So what you gotta do is get that pulled off, get these two pulled out. These are 15 millimeters here on either side that hold the master cylinder to the brake booster. And then down inside the interior here, you have your brake pedal with the rod assembly on it. Kind of tough to see. And up into the firewall, there are four 15 millimeter bolts, which have to be removed. And then you can start your process of getting your new hydroboost reinstalled. So I'm going to leave this in a bag until I get a little further here. It appears these do not come with gaskets, so I may have to make my own. I have gasket material here that we can cut. So I've got a couple things started here. As you can see, that vent line's off. This line is loose and it is off. This is kind of a messier job, I will not kid anybody. This line's off. All right, he's out of the way. This guy's out of the way. Boom, boom. I took my fast lift pump harness and I kind of bundled him up out of the way. So that way we can get right down to this thing and not fight it. So I've got the lines out now and they're kind of floating in ether, doing their own thing. I'm gonna work on getting these two 15s out and then I'll show you guys what it looks like with the master separated from the booster. And then we can kind of go from there and I'll start working on the interior, show you as I go. The two 15 millimeter nuts have been removed, 1 and 2. So here it is separated. As you can see down inside the bore of the hydroboost, there is currently power steering fluid that's seeping in. And frankly, that's why I have to change this, is because the system unfortunately had a O-ring or a seal failure, and so this hydroboost has unfortunately expired. So now I'm going to work on doing is crawling into the interior of this thing and undoing the 4 bolts and the rod for the brake pedal. Do yourself a favor, and depending on what you've got, if it's a extended cab, regular cab, put your seat all the way back to buy you a little more space. And that way you can start working on getting this brake assembly torn apart and get your booster out of here. So these bolts up in the back, those 4 have to come out. So I'm gonna weasel my arm up there and get those undone, and weasel my hand up here and get the rod undone. And it's gonna be kind of hard to film, but I figured if I can explain and show you guys the 4 bolts that need to be undone, you can probably figure out the rest on your own. So I'll work on getting these torn out and hopefully be able to show you guys what the booster looks like sitting next to the old one very shortly. Here's our fasteners from the interior. 1, 2, 3, 4 bolts. And the Jesus clip from the brake rod. Get yourself plenty of extensions, 15 millimeter on a swivel, and you pretty much get to everything you need. So that being said, the rod's disconnected and all the lines are off. So here's our mobile hydroboost, whatever it's called, the thing. So now the fun part of trying to get it loose off the firewall, because they put a gasket with double-sided tape on here. So I'll have to do some contorting, twisting, pulling. We'll get this yanked out of here and I'll set it on the tailgate and compare it to the new one. After some wiggling, giggling, and moving it around, it comes right out. Fun fact, all you gotta do is leave the master cylinder where it sits. pull it back a little bit on those plastic clips, and you suddenly have plenty of room. It comes right out through here, no issues. The prop rod comes right out for the pedal. And then we have new and old. So I did not go too extravagant on this, and I basically just got a stock replacement for it. This one, you can see there's fluid built up on the back, and it's pushing out of this rear O-ring. So that's part of my problem. And the other part of my problem here is that this front bore is saturated and the O-ring is junk, and it is pushing fluid right out of the rusty spot of the bore there. You can see where it's set for a while. So this is why I'm replacing this. And so if you end up with a leaking hydroboost, chances are you're gonna have to swap in a new one. This job is really not as bad as everybody promotes it to be. So now that I have these sitting here side by side, I'll make sure that all my fittings are the same, check and make sure my line size are the same, get my old O-rings off, and then I'll pop this wonderful new booster in and work on reassembly. Once it's reassembled, we'll talk about bleeding it. While this is out, they give you these nice little new O-rings, which go on these lines, inlet and return. So I'm going to use my pick and pop these off quick and do these O-rings before I have to put it back in the truck. So we'll get those done, make sure the rest of my lines look good, and then I'll slide this new booster into place. Quick little detail, this is why we don't reuse O-rings. If you could see how smashed down this thing is and how oblong and crushed and rotted it is. So new ones are on. I'm gonna grab this booster and see what I can do to wiggle it in here. Maybe I'll try to one-hand it, hold the camera in the other, and then we can see what's going on. All right, so putting it in, you kind of have to clock it to get it past the master cylinder there. But once you do, it for the most part lines up and pinches your fingers, and then you swear a little bit, and some other things happen. So I've got the rod in, and I have most of the holes lined up. I just can't do this with one hand. You've got to support from the bottom and push from the front to get it to line up. So I'm going to slip this in. I left all my covers on to protect from any kind of dirt, debris from getting inside the new booster. And then once I have it in place, I'll start putting the bolts back through from the firewall side and the interior. So a little bit of finagling and finesse. The brake light switch here is back on. As you can see, the rod is back in. All 4 bolts are on and tight. Put the vent line back on with our pliers. 18mm feed line, 16mm pressure line. I need to tighten these 15mm up real quick on both sides of the master. And then I'm going and start the truck. I'm going to pop this off, and that way if there's any air in the system, it can freely remove itself when I start the engine. And we'll start the bleeding process. The engine is running. Check the leaks. So far so good. They're coming out of those lines. The reservoir is mostly full. So I'm going to treat this like bleeding power steering. So take a lock. There it is. You can kind of hear it gurgle. Alright, check your reservoir. Some goop in it. So go ahead and lock the lock again. So you'll do this repetitively until it stops gargling and air stops coming out. You're gonna quiet your pump up once it's done. And that's your hydroboost replacement on your 01 to 07 classic GMC 800 truck. Hopefully this helps somebody out. Thanks, guys.